2024 will go down in history as the year of elections, intensified conflict, and questions about the stability of the international system. A number of the developments that we've seen were seen as surprising. But were they really? How much of what happened in 2024 could have been predicted? And how unique was last year compared to others? Good evening, my name is Mateusz Mazzini, and this is a very special edition of Wider View. Humans have a tendency to perceive the current moment in history as the most unique one. We tend to believe that whatever happens now, or during our lifetimes, is the pivotal period for our entire civilization. But that is rarely the case, as a lot of social processes turn out to be inconsequential, or, to put it simply, repetitive. This week, we'll take a look back at the year 2024 and try to see it in a broader historical perspective. Were the past 12 months actually unprecedented? Which of the key events will turn out to be insignificant? And are we really on the verge of an entirely new political and social cycle? We look for answers in our first report.
In 2024, over 3 billion people in more than 70 countries were eligible to cast their vote in democratic elections. Citizens cast their ballots in India, the most populous democracy. Narendra Modi held on to power, but not with the landslide victory he was hoping for. And in Europe, citizens of EU member states elected a new European Parliament. But how we interpret the results of that ballot is contingent upon our ideological preferences. By and large, the hard right was prevented from assuming positions of power and influence. But at the same time, left-wing and Green parties saw their worst results in years. The new European Commission was approved under the renewed leadership of Ursula von der Leyen. But its support among MEPs is lower than any other commission since 1995. Given the shift to the right and domestic instability in key member countries, the EU might struggle to reclaim global influence.
The ridiculous and baseless indictment of me by...
Much of the world's attention has been hijacked by the US presidential race. Donald Trump's campaign proved immune to court convictions and criticism on moral grounds. Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance pushed him to withdraw his re-election bid, but the decision came too late. Democrats, left with little time to find a replacement and deprived of emerging political talent, nominated Kamala Harris. Despite running an objectively good campaign and receiving significant financial backing, she lost to Trump. Although his return to the White House heralds even more political instability, the results were met by some with relief. With a clear winner and concession on behalf of Harris, fears of political violence and lengthy legal battles disappeared.
We're going to make America great again.
2024 was the year of anti-incumbency. Politicians that governed in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic lost power almost everywhere. Independent of their political orientations, voters blamed them for economic hardship and increased polarization. Governments in Great Britain, Japan, Portugal, the US, and other countries fell victim of this process. Germany is quite likely to be next, after its next elections in February. The private sector gained ground in its rivalry with the public sphere. With Elon Musk and the likes of him in positions of political influence, more power will reside with unelected officials.
Fight!
Links between autocracies became more evident this year, as China, Russia, Iran, and other non-democratic countries formalized several cooperation deals. Generative artificial intelligence became a permanent feature of the labor market, but its regulatory framework continues to be scarce. Little progress was achieved in ending the conflict in the Middle East, where new fronts opened up. Ukraine has entered its third winter fighting against Russia, and it will be the hardest one to endure. The world comes out of 2024 with several new problems, and a lot of old ones that remain unresolved.
Was 2024 an exceptional year? How can we separate events with lasting consequences from typical political noise? And are there lessons to be drawn for the US, European Union, and other democratic actors? As the year comes to an end, we invited a world-class expert to reflect with us upon the last 12 months. And I'm very pleased to say, joining me tonight is Sylvie Kauffmann, editorial director of Le Monde newspaper. Sylvie, good evening and welcome to Wider View.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
And I want to begin with what we highlighted in the opening report. 2024, we knew it since the very beginning, was going to be the year of elections. Now, when almost all the races are over, it's time for an assessment. Globally speaking, in your opinion, is democracy all over the world coming out of 24 more resilient or perhaps more damaged?
Is it damaged? I think the balance is weaker. We're losing our sense of security and of balance in a way. But I wouldn't say democracies are damaged. I mean, people are voting en masse. In many countries, you have seen an upsurge in the turnout. So that's quite interesting and that's quite encouraging. It means that people want to take part and be politically active, take part in the political process and in the democratic process. And it is true that we've had a lot of upheaval in the democratic world. We had, as you pointed out very rightly in your report, an anti-incumbent mood, very, very strong, what we call dégagisme in French. The voters are in a rebellious mood. But on the in the other part of the world, where you have autocracies and dictatorship, I mean, strong men are even stronger. And of course, voters don't have a chance to to express their rebellious mood. So that's a very interesting contrast you have between those two worlds, actually.
So I want to pick up on what you just said with regard to the rebellious mood among societies, because in many democracies we've seen massive voters' dissatisfaction with the state of the economy, which sort of runs parallel to the very fact that in many places the economy is actually not in that bad of a shape, and we've seen that disparity more than anywhere else in the United States. Where do you think this disparity, as I said, comes from between the perception of what's going on with personal finances and the actual state as the data reflects on it?
Well, the inflation has been a very important factor in all those elections, definitely in Western countries. So I think that was the main problem we definitely saw that in France, of course, where the cost of living was a big factor in our elections. But the most striking, of course, was in the United States, because the Biden administration had a good economic record, it was the figures looked good, but the way people felt it was completely different. The feeling of the people was completely different. So there was, of course, a gap between the perception of the voters and the perception of the good work which was done by the administration itself. And I think that was one of the mistakes of the Biden administration, is that they were not good enough at communicating how good their economic policy had been, and how conducive it was to improvement or to a future improvement in the situation, in the individual situation of people.
So my next question would still be about rebellion, but perhaps from the other end of that equation. Who capitalized on that societal anger? Because contrary to previous periods of economic crisis like 2008, for instance, this year, we did not really see much of social unrest, social protest, social upheaval. In 2008, we saw Occupy Wall Street, Podemos in Spain, a few other movements that quickly obviously disintegrated, but were very vocal as a manifestation of societal anger, dissatisfaction with how the economy was run, especially by institutions. This time around, not much of societal boycott. Where is this anger being channeled now then?
Well, in the ballot box, apparently. I have to say, in France, we haven't been short of demonstrations. We're never short of demonstrations, so people have been
That
quite
is very
active.
true, yes.
People have been quite active in the streets as well. But I think the anger was mostly channeled in elections, and that's how we saw people, this anti-incumbency phenomenon, which has been fairly widespread. So I think this is where you see anger. There's also discontent with the democratic process itself, and I think particularly in Europe, we need to be more creative. This is very true for France. We need to be more creative at making people feeling more represented in the public process, in the way policies are decided, are discussed, are debated. It's not enough to have people are not satisfied with just having a parliament and a president. They want to express themselves differently as well. They want to have other forums to express their views or to debate. And I think this is something which has been felt for some time. But politicians have to take this problem squarely, I think, and face it.
So now I'm going to a little bit move away from my role as a reporter and enter the role of a concerned European citizen. How does one become more creative about representative democracy, especially in political systems that are as rigid as the ones in Europe? After all, this is a very straightforward and a very old-fashioned political representation system. We go to cast our ballots every 3, 4, or 5 years. We elect representatives, and pretty much that's it. Is this high time, after what happened in 2024, to maybe add some spice to how we perform the democratic duties in Europe and elsewhere?
I mean, you'll always have elections, that's for sure. We need them, and we need representation in parliaments and so on. So this is something which, of course, is not going to change. What I mean is that we, for instance, after the upheaval of the Gilets jaunes, of the yellow vests in France a few years ago, there were those public debates where the President Macron took part, and this was something which was interesting. But then but that was just one particular phenomenon for that time and for that event. But then there were committees made up of citizens, and so we had big debates about how those citizens were chosen. But they are kind of civic committees on one particular topic. So you can have on environment, on euthanasia, on social issues, and these people meet with experts, with politicians, but they are basically citizens, and they meet for several weekends in a row. It is very well organized, and then they come up with some recommendations, and then it's up to the political representation to take up these recommendations and pass them into bills and then into laws eventually. But this is a way of making people more of having a bigger participation of citizens in the political process.
And To conclude this part of our conversation, I wanted to ask about the big elephant in the room in any discussion about democracy right now, which is the internet and obviously social media platforms. How much are they a solution and how much are they the root cause of what we've seen happening? Just recently in the presidential elections in Romania, we've seen a right-wing candidate that wasn't even mentioned among the front-runners a few days before the ballot, then emerging victorious in the first round, and then obviously the Constitutional Court nullifying the results of it, largely because of this disinformation campaign. How do you see 2024 as a year, or through the lenses of what was happening in political mobilization also on the internet?
Well, obviously the Romanian case is an extreme one, but we saw how much. I mean, you have different processes. You have disinformation campaigns being part of what we call the hybrid war, mostly from Russia. Yeah, so this is, of course, it will use the internet, but it can use other means of influencing people as well. And then you have the general use of social networks by citizens, not by foreign powers, but which obviously by citizens and by political parties and by candidates. And obviously, if this is not regulated as part of the electoral process, you will have problems with inequality in the use of those or of the access, inequality in the access to those social media. So I think this is obviously a phenomenon which is now completely part of all our election campaigns, and we have to really look into it and see how we can integrate it in the regulation of the electoral campaign process.
But will we be able to do so? Because in order to create very stable and sufficient regulations, we need very powerful institutions. And the one thing we've seen almost entirely on the planet throughout 2024 was the weakening of institutions, very often at the expense of unaccountable, non-elected officials. Obviously, Elon Musk and his relationship with Donald Trump is the textbook example of that, but that is a process that accelerates in many places. So would you say that it's justified to say 2024 was a year in which kleptocracy in various of its forms accelerated globally?
I'm not sure. I mean, you have globally, of course, if you want to put it that way, kleptocracy accelerated. But you have different situations in different parts of the planet. I mean, of course, Elon Musk, and the campaign in the US was a kind of extreme example. I'm not sure we're there in Europe. I mean, we're definitely not there yet in Europe. I'm not sure we will get to that point because we have another approach to regulation. And I mean, we have been able to, in most European democracies, we have been able to regulate the access to public media in time of election campaigns. We should be able to do it on private media as well. So it's a question of, I think it's really a question, it's not only a question of technology or of tycoons and so on. I think it's really a question of confronting the issue, knowing exactly how it works, and deciding what we want to do with it and whether we want to have equal access to public space during election campaign or whether we're ready to cede this power to private individuals.
So let's stay in the US for a second, because the one big thing that we've also seen in 2024 was the announcements by Trump himself, but also the Trump team, that the United States are going to impose tariffs on almost every trade partner, and that obviously risks a spillover effect, a domino effect onto Europe and other places. Do you think that with a return of sort of more nationalist, protectionist capitalism, this is the beginning of an end of free globalized trade that took its roots in the 90s?
Well, this is yet to be seen. I mean, we don't know exactly what the Trump administration is going to do. It has already announced that, I mean, the future, the president-elect and his team has already announced that they would put some tariffs in America, on the American continent to other countries. But I mean, we saw how Canada reacted. Prime Minister Trudeau went to see Donald Trump to talk about it. So this is not yet in place. Europe knows what to expect. The European Union, I mean, knows what to expect. It is better equipped than it was in the first term of Donald Trump. So I think it has more tools at its disposal. Then it will be a question of a decision process and political will in Brussels and an agreement between the member states. But of course, it's going to be there are going to be tensions, of course, with China also. We'll see what happens with China. And for Europe, it will be a problem if there are higher tariffs imposed by the United States on Chinese products. It means there will be higher chances that the European market then is flooded with those Chinese products. So it's going to affect all of us. But I think, is this the end of globalization as we knew it? We've been saying this for a long time already, that of course globalization has to evolve and adapt to new conditions and circumstances and political environment and changing political environment. But I think the jury is still out on this. We have to see how the Trump administration really behaves and what it does.
So let's wait for what future has in store for us. And let's come back for the final questions to Europe, because the one thing that a lot of people are struggling, I guess, in Europe with regard to the assessment of 2024 is, was it a good year for the far right or perhaps not so much? Because on the one hand, they made a lot of advancements, especially in national governments. They did extremely well in some parts in the European Parliament elections. But on the other hand, they didn't get any top positions in the new EU leadership. And they're still very much cordoned out by the mainstream parties, especially in main democracies. Where do you sit on that assessment?
Well, it's a very powerful trend across Europe. Of course, we've seen this in France particularly. I mean, each country has its own situation. As you know, in Poland, you've had a different situation also, and you had a return to. You had you had a different government coming back last year. But on the whole, you can say that far right parties and nationalist, ultra-conservative parties are on the rise across Europe. Now, the fact that in the European Parliament, they are definitely stronger than they were. They have 3 parliamentary groups now. They only have 1 vice president position in the Commission, but you can see that their weight is, of course, much bigger than it used to be. But the resistance is also adjusting to this this rise, and you can see that there is resistance. And in France, we really have the 2 trends, facing each other. In the first round of the legislative election, for instance, on June 30, we had a big rise of the National Rally, the Marine Le Pen's party. And on the second round, we had a pushback from other political forces. And you end up with a result which says that you have 2/3 of the voters who don't want the far right to be in government. So you really have those 2 opposing trends, and I think we'll see a continuation of this fight between populism, let's say, or far right or ultra-conservatism and nationalist trends, and a democratic pushback.
So seems that after all, there were quite a few things and trends that happened in 2024 that will remain with us in the year to come. Sylvie Kauffmann, editorial director of Le Monde newspaper, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last year definitely brought about some trends we will be keeping an eye on in 2025. Others, like advancements of the hard right and kleptocratic reforms, were just a continuation of past tendencies. But the key takeaway from the last 12 months is the growing complexity of international affairs, which we will continue to explain to you here as best as we can. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next week, we will continue our series of special editions and try to look what 2025 has in store for us. Make sure you're with us next Thursday. Have a good evening and a very happy New Year.